I'm a girl who lives like modern Cinderella. My name is Amy, and I'm just an ordinary girl living in a small town. Well, as ordinary as one can be when they're living with their cousin, Laura, who also happens to be the most demanding person I know. She's always getting on my case, acting like she's my big sister or something. But the truth is, we're not even siblings. Nope, we just live under the same roof. And I will tell you how I live there and my story about my journey to find my real family. Growing up, I was raised by the most loving and kind-hearted older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Jones. They had a quaint little farm where we lived, surrounded by animals and the beauty of nature. Life was simple, and I loved every minute of it. They took me in when I was just a baby and raised me as their grandchild, showering me with love and affection. Mr. and Mrs. Jones taught me the value of hard work and compassion, showing me how to care for the animals and the land. They also made sure I had an education, taking me to the local school every day. I was truly blessed to have them in my life. I remember one day, after a long day of working on the farm, Mrs. Jones sat down with me on the porch, a warm smile on her face. "Amy, you know we love you like our own, right?" she said, her voice gentle and soothing. I nodded, beaming at her. "Of course, Grandma. I love you too." Mr. and Mrs. Jones would often have these heart-to-heart conversations with me, and they were some of my most treasured memories. Sadly, life has a way of throwing curveballs. We lived together happily until one fateful day when Grandpa was working in the vegetable garden. He suddenly collapsed, and sadly, he passed away. Grandma was devastated and never will be the same after that. She had lost her soulmate, and her health also began to decline. One evening, Grandma called me into her room, and gripping my hand, she said, "Sweetie, when we adopted you, we knew you would bring joy to my life. Life might be difficult without us, but don't worry, we'll always be with you." "Don't say that, Grandma, you will be fine," I said, but I know her final moment will come soon. "When I'm gone, look for my old wallet hidden under the old cart that you always played when you were young. We've saved up some money for you, our dear Amy. That's the final thing I can do for you." Before I could ask her any more about this, she closed her eyes and left me forever. I stayed with her for hours, crying uncontrollably. Afterward, following Grandma's instructions, I went in search of the money. I couldn't believe my eyes when I opened the wallet. There was at least $25,000 inside. I wondered how my grandparents had managed to save up such an amount. I knew they were frugal, but this was beyond my expectations. Both of my adoptive grandparents passed away within a short period of time. Their deaths left a gaping hole in my heart, and I was devastated. However, they had left me a small inheritance, which I was grateful for. With nowhere else to go, I moved in with their daughter, Mrs. Thompson, and her family. She was my adoptive aunt, after all. The transition was challenging, and I quickly realized that Mrs. Thompson and her daughter Laura were nothing like the loving couple who had raised me. Laura and I were the same age, but the similarities ended there. She was demanding, judgmental, and always seemed to look down on me. Adjusting to my new life was difficult, but I tried my best to stay positive and make the most of my situation. Life with the Thompsons was a far cry from the idyllic days I spent on the farm. The house was always bustling with activity, and there was never a quiet moment. Laura seemed to take every opportunity to make my life miserable, mocking my clothes, my taste in music, and anything else she could find. And Mrs. Thompson always made me do all the chores around the house every day. They'd mess up the house then force me to clean it, like I'm the only one who lived here. One evening, as we were eating dinner, Laura sneered at me from across the table. "Amy, do you even know what a salad fork is? I bet you didn't even have forks on the farm." I clenched my jaw, trying to ignore her. Yes, Laura, I know what a salad fork is, I replied, forcing a smile. Mrs. Thompson chimed in, girls, let's not argue. Please eat your dinner. Secretly, I kept the money my grandparents had left me hidden away, planning to use it when I turned 18 to start a new life. I dreamed of going to college and maybe even traveling the world. It was my little beacon of hope in the sea of negativity I found myself in. One fateful day, as Laura and I were getting ready for school, she called out to me from the garage. Hey, Amy. Come on, I'm driving today. I hurried out the door, grateful for a ride. As I approached the car, Laura suddenly revved the engine, and the wheels spun, splashing mud all over me. She laughed hysterically, her eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. Oops. My bad, Amy. I guess you'll just have to walk to school like that, she taunted, driving away, leaving me standing there, covered in mud and feeling utterly humiliated. I wanted to scream or cry, but I forced myself to stay composed. Taking a deep breath, I turned around and went back inside to clean up, knowing I'd be late for school. As I wiped the mud off my face, I promised myself that I would find a way to rise above Laura's cruelty. Yeah, I've been living in the city for almost a year, but I still haven't been able to fit in. Perhaps it's because I'm always wearing the same boring clothes and borrowing all my books from the library. Mrs. Thompson won't buy me anything new, and I can't use my own money without raising suspicions. I couldn't even afford to join the school picnic. So I guess I'll never truly be one of them. At school, I didn't do any better. I struggled to fit in, and I'm always an easy target for mockery and tauntings from the famous girls, but a few kind classmates made it bearable. During recess, the class monitor announced that the prom was coming up and the dress code was formal. As everyone else cheered and clapped excitedly, I hung my head and sighed. I didn't have anything to wear to prom. During lunch, my friend Sarah approached me. Hey, Amy, are you going to prom? It's going to be a blast. I hesitated, unsure if I should even entertain the idea. I don't know, Sarah. It's not really my thing. Sarah smiled warmly. You should definitely come. It'll be a fun night, and we all want you there. Don't worry, we'll help you look amazing. Laura walked in and overheard me talking to Sarah and, of course, couldn't resist poking fun at me. You? Going to prom? I'd pay to see that. I bet you don't even know how to dance. Her words stung, but they also lit a fire inside me. You know what, Laura? I will go to prom. And I'll have a great time, whether you like it or not. At dinner that evening, I told Mrs. Madison about the prom and suggested that it could be a reward in exchange for doing all the housework. She coldly replied, "You live under my roof rent-free, and now you want me to do housework for you too? Or what, princess?" Then she turned to Kelly, smiled, and asked, "Darling, have you decided on a prom dress yet?" Kelly showed her mom pictures of beautiful dresses on her phone while smirking at me. With determination, I set out to find a dress for the big night. I didn't have much money, so I scoured secondhand shops with Sarah until I found a beautiful but outdated gown. With some creativity and a few alterations, I transformed it into a stunning dress that I knew would turn heads. On the night of the prom, I entered the venue with my classmates by my side. As the music played and everyone danced, I felt a sense of freedom and happiness I hadn't experienced in a long time. Laura looked on, her face a mix of disbelief and annoyance, as I danced the night away. Despite her attempts to bring me down, I had risen above her negativity and proven to myself that I was just as deserving of a magical prom night as anyone else. Prom night was in full swing, and I felt like a princess. The lights sparkled, and my dress shimmered as I danced with my friends. I could feel the positive energy around me, and I couldn't help but smile. Hey, Amy, Chris, the new senior student everyone was talking about, approached me. You look amazing tonight. I blushed, not used to getting compliments. Thanks, Chris. You look great too. As we chatted, I noticed Laura hovering nearby, clearly trying to get Chris's attention. She shot me a jealous look and sauntered over. Chris, would you like to dance with me? Chris looked at her, then back at me with a kind smile. Thanks for the offer, Laura, but I'm enjoying talking to Amy right now. Maybe later. Laura's face turned red with embarrassment, and she stormed off the dance floor, angrily leaving the prom. Meanwhile, I continued to have an incredible night with Chris and my newfound friends. We laughed, danced, and took countless pictures together, making memories that would last a lifetime. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly happy and appreciated. Laura's attempts to ruin my night had only made it better. When I returned home from prom, still glowing from the magical evening, I was immediately confronted by Laura and Mrs. Thompson, their faces twisted with anger. Amy, where were you? We know you stole money from us. Laura accused me, her voice sharp. What? No, I didn't. I protested, genuinely confused. Mrs. Thompson chimed in. Laura found her money missing, and you're the only one who could have taken it. I was hurt by their accusations, but I kept my composure. I promise you, I didn't take your money. I have no reason to. They didn't believe me and stormed off, leaving me in the hallway, my heart sinking that I ran up to my room and tried to shake away the negative thoughts and think back to how happy I was at prom. Then as usual I checked my hiding spot. A sudden sound behind my back, I looked towards the stairs but no one was there. I thought it was probably just the house creaking or something and went to bed. The next day at school was amazing as loads of kids stopped and talked to me how amazing I was at the prom. This is the best feeling ever. When I got home, I went to check on my hidden stash of money, the inheritance my grandparents had left me. To my horror, it was gone. I felt a surge of panic and anger, quickly realizing that Laura and Mrs. Thompson must have taken it, falsely accusing me to deflect suspicion. Furious, I ran to the living room where Mrs. Thompson and Laura were watching TV and demanded my money back. Of course they denied it instead and accused me of being an ungrateful brat for living under their roof and keeping the money for myself. I knew they'd taken my money, but what could I do about it? I had no choice but to go back to my room and cried as I looked at old photos of me with my grandparents. At school the following day, I couldn't hide my sadness. Chris, the new senior student, noticed my gloomy demeanor and approached me. Hey, Amy, what's wrong? You look really upset, he asked with genuine concern. I hesitated at first but eventually opened up to him about my situation at home and the stolen money. To my surprise, he was incredibly understanding and supportive. That's really awful, Amy. But don't worry, I'm here for you. You're not alone, he assured me. After school, Lily insisted that I carry her bulky backpack home. I was too exhausted to protest, so I reluctantly agreed. That's when Chris pulled up beside me and asked, "Hey, that looks pretty heavy. Need a ride?" I nodded and climbed into his car, managing a smile to express my gratitude. Chris asked, "Still upset about what happened?" "You can talk to me, you know. I'm a great listener, I promise." His kindness was comforting, and I instantly felt at ease around him. We began to talk more frequently and started spending time together. Gradually, I found myself becoming closer to Chris. We'd sit together during lunch, share our thoughts, and even study together. Sometimes we would go for strolls in the park. He was like the brother I never had, always looking out for me and offering a shoulder to lean on. A few weeks later, while cleaning up yet another mess Mrs. Thompson had made in the house, I discovered something hidden under her bed. It was the old purse that Grandma had left for me, and all the money was gone. Anger and disbelief washed over me as I realized that Laura and Mrs. Thompson were indeed the thieves. I stormed downstairs, purse in hand, and confronted them. Mrs. Madison just shrugged. That purse belonged to my mother. Therefore, the money is mine. You must have stolen it from my poor, elderly parents. Kelly chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Really / tricking a sick old woman into giving you her life savings? This is pretty low even for you. I couldn't take it anymore. Grandma left that money for me, not you. You two are monsters. I yelled at them, grabbed the purse, and retreated to my room. I wanted to leave this horrible place, so I began packing my things. But when I tried to open the door, I discovered it was locked. They locked me in my room. Mrs. Thompson said with a demeaning voice, "You are grounded, young lady. No school for you until further notice. And you'll spend your days doing housework." I looked for my phone and remembered I left downstairs, so I couldn't even call Chris for help. Each day, they unlocked the door only to give me cleaning tasks around the house. Mrs. Thompson made sure that if I tried to run, then she would call the police for stealing my grandma's money that she left for me. Well, that's how things go sometimes. I had no choice. As I scrubbed floors and washed dishes, I couldn't help but feel more resentful towards Laura and Mrs. Thompson. I knew I had to find a way to regain control of my life and make them realize that they couldn't get away with treating me so poorly. It had been a few days since I'd last seen Chris, and I was starting to worry that he'd forgotten about me. As I was cleaning the living room window, I saw him pull up in front of the house in his car. My heart leaped with joy, and I waved at him, trying to signal my situation without alerting Laura or Mrs. Thompson. Chris immediately noticed that something was wrong and walked up to the front door, knocking loudly. Mrs. Thompson opened the door, trying her best to put on a friendly face. "Hello, Chris. What brings you here?" "I just wanted to check on Amy. She hasn't been in school, and I'm worried about her," Chris said, his voice laced with concern. Mrs. Thompson hesitated before responding, "She's just a little under the weather. I'm sure she'll be back in school soon." Noticing that Chris wasn't buying it, she reluctantly let him in. He quickly made his way to my room and was shocked to find me locked up. "Amy, what's going on?" I explained everything that had happened. Chris was furious and insisted that we leave the house immediately. He helped me pack a bag, and we went out while Laura and Mrs. Thompson were busy arguing in the kitchen. I had no idea where chores was taking me, but anything would be a way better option than listening to any more of Mrs. Thompson's voice, so I got in his car. He took me to his house, and there was this man in there. I suppose it's David's dad, Mr. Jackson, a kind and gentle man. As we talked, he began to share stories of his past, including one about a daughter he had to give up for adoption due to circumstances beyond his control. My heart raced as I listened to his story, realizing that it mirrored my own. Seeing the recognition on my face, Mr. Jackson took a deep breath and finally admitted, "Amy, I'm your father. I've been searching for you for years, hoping that one day we would be reunited." As I sat there, still trying to process the fact that Mr. Jackson was my father, I felt a warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. Chris patted me on the back and smiled. "I guess that makes us siblings, huh?" I smiled back through my tears, grateful for this newfound family. Over the next few days, my father filled me in on the details of my birth family and the years he spent searching for me. It turned out when I was just a baby, my mom fell ill and passed away. My dad faced immense difficulty in raising both me and my brother, so he handed me over to a church. Eventually, my dad managed to get his life back on track, and he knew I had been adopted by an elderly couple, my dear grandparents. He started sending them money to assist in raising me. However, when he came looking for me, I was no longer there. He discovered that I was now living with Mrs. Thompson, so he relocated to the city with the hope of reuniting with me. By an incredible stroke of luck, Chris ended up attending the same school as me. He mentioned that the first time he laid eyes on me, he felt a strange bond right away. It was amazing that his intuition was true, as it was soon revealed that I was indeed his long-lost sister. That was a lot to take, but this was incredible news to me. "So, what do you say, Amy?" my dad asked hesitantly. "Would you like to move in with us and start a new life together?" Without a moment's hesitation, I replied, "Yes, I'd love to." As I settled into my new home, Chris helped me get comfortable and showed me around the neighborhood. We talked and laughed, quickly forming a strong bond as siblings. One day, as we walked to school together, I asked him, "Were you really okay with me just showing up and becoming a part of your family?" Chris chuckled and replied, "Of course, Amy. I've always wanted a sister, and now I've got one. Besides, you're the only one who can keep me in check when I get too annoying." I laughed, grateful for the love and support I was now surrounded by. Life wasn't going to be easy for me, but at least I had found my family and stayed by their side. Now you're probably wondering what became of Mrs. Thompson and Laura. One day, while walking with Chris to grab some ice cream, we passed by the Thompsons' house and saw a "For Sale" sign on the lawn. I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice in the air. It appeared that Mrs. Madison had been spending money like crazy, and now she found herself drowning in debt. As a result, she had no choice but to sell the house. Chris noticed my expression and asked, "Hey, what's up with that? You seem pretty satisfied." I replied, "Well, it looks like karma has finally caught up with them. Laura and Mrs. Thompson treated me horribly, and now they're facing the consequences." We continued walking, and I couldn't help but think about how much my life had changed since I moved in with my father and Chris. We had our ups and downs like any family, but the love and support I received from them was unmatched.